Who told you to touch that music box? Graham Pike's voice cut through the market as Dan Mercer steadied the walnut case with one hand and turned its tiny brass key with the other. Lily clutched the crescent-cracked lid against her chest while Graham reached to close it. 7 fragile notes rose above the rattling tin roof. 20 feet away, Evelyn Vale stopped mid-step and turned around. "Don't let him take it," Lily whispered. "My mom said it has to finish the song." 3 hours earlier, the Bellwether Flea Market had opened beneath a pale Saturday sky, its long metal aisles filling with the smell of kettle corn, old paper, damp wood, and engine oil drifting from Dan's repair table near the west entrance. He sat beneath a hand-painted sign that read small mechanical repairs, his faded denim jacket hanging from the back of a folding chair and his father's worn leather toolbox open beside him. Noah, his 10-year-old son, arranged screwdrivers by size while Dan listened to the uneven tick of a travel clock brought in by an elderly customer. The clock skipped every 6th beat. Somewhere farther down the aisle, a music box played 5 clean notes, stumbled on the next 2, then stopped with a dry metallic click. Dan looked up. The sound came from Graham Pike's antique stall, where glass cabinets stood beneath warm lamps and gold-lettered cards described ordinary objects as museum quality. Graham wore a navy sweater over a pressed white shirt, speaking gently to a small girl with a blue ribbon tied around her wrist. Lily stood alone beside the counter, holding a walnut music box with a crescent-shaped crack across its lid. "I didn't break it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but she did not look away. Graham smiled with practiced patience. "No one is blaming you, sweetheart. Old things fail. Sometimes grief makes us remember them differently." He reached for the box. Lily pulled it closer. "It was my mom's." Dan watched Graham's thumb cover a half-peeled circular label beneath the case. The motion lasted less than a second. It was small enough that no one else seemed to notice. "Dad?" Noah said softly, following his gaze. "That man keeps hiding the bottom." Dan closed the travel clock and returned it to its owner before walking over. He did not announce himself as an expert. He did not accuse Graham of anything. He simply lowered himself until he was level with Lily and asked, "May I hear what it does?" Graham answered for her. "There's nothing to hear." She dropped it. "I can answer," Lily said, tightening both hands around the lid. "Done waited." She nodded. He placed a folded shop cloth beneath the box and asked her to keep holding the top so no one could say he had removed anything. When he touched the brass key, he felt too much resistance. Pressure trapped in the spring, the kind that could snap the mechanism if someone forced it. "I'm not fixing it yet," he said. "I'm keeping it from getting worse." Graham's smile thinned. "You are not licensed to appraise antiques." "Good thing I'm not appraising it." Dan turned the key once. The melody began. At the far end of the aisle, a woman in a cream coat stopped beside a waiting black sedan. Evelyn Vale slowly turned toward the sound. Graham moved to shut the lid, but Dan's hand remained still between them. "A broken object can be repaired," he said. "A child called a liar is harder." Evelyn took one step closer. Graham glanced at her, then at the box and said too quickly, "It's only an old Vale lullaby." Lily looked up at Dan, frightened now for a different reason. "I never told him that name." Lily's words hung between them. "I never told him that name." For one breath, no one moved. Then Graham Pike gave a small, almost sympathetic laugh and rested 2 fingers on the walnut lid. "Children hear more than we realize." "She didn't hear it from me," Dan said. "That's enough," Graham replied. The market's fluorescent strips buzzed beneath the corrugated roof, washing the antique stall in a pale light that made Graham's gold-lettered display cards gleam and Dan's faded denim jacket look grayer than it was. Somewhere behind them, a vendor rang a brass bell to announce a sale, but the sound died quickly in the growing circle of onlookers. Graham turned toward Evelyn Vale with the calm expression of a man accustomed to being believed. "Ms. Vale, I apologize that you were drawn into this." The child dropped an old music box, and this gentleman began tampering with it before we could document the damage. Dan's hand remained beside the brass key, open and still. "I released pressure from the spring." You opened it. No, you used a tool. The key was already in the lock. 3 quick answers, each quieter than the accusation before it. Graham's smile held, but the muscle beside his jaw tightened. Evelyn looked from the box to Dan's hands, noting the grease caught beneath his nails, the worn cuff of his jacket, and the leather toolbox Noah held against his knees. Her gaze did not soften. It sharpened. "Who is responsible for this section of the market?" she asked. A stocky man in a green bellwether vest pushed through the small crowd. Curtis Bell carried a clipboard under one arm and smelled faintly of coffee and peppermint gum. "I am," he said. "What happened?" Graham answered first. He explained that Lily had entered the stall alone, picked up a consigned item, dropped it, and refused to return it. He described Dan as a repairman from the West Isle who had inserted himself into a private property dispute. Every sentence was polished. Every harsh edge was wrapped in concern. "The girl is grieving," Graham said. "No one wants to frighten her. But compassion cannot replace procedure." Curtis glanced at Lily, then at Dan. "Do you have proof the box belongs to you?" Lily opened her mouth. Graham placed a hand over the empty space above the counter, not touching her, yet somehow closing the conversation before she could speak. "She has a photograph," he said gently, "of a similar box." Lily's face reddened. "It is not similar. Sweetheart, my name is Lily." The words were small, but they landed hard. Dan shifted half a step so he stood beside her rather than in front of her. He did not speak for her. He simply made it harder for the adults to pretend she was not there. Lily pulled a folded photograph from the pocket of her coat, but Graham shook his head before she could open it. "That image has already been handled. We have no way to verify when it was taken or what object appears in it." Curtis accepted the photograph barely, glanced at the faded edges, then set it on the counter beside Graham's business card. The card was thick, cream-colored, embossed with Pike Heritage appraisals in gold. Dan noticed Curtis's eyes pause on the television logo printed beneath Graham's name. The balance of the room shifted without anyone saying so. Reputation had entered as evidence. "Mr. Mercer," Curtis said, reading Dan's name from the patch sewn above his shirt pocket. "Are you certified in antique valuation?" "No." "Employed by the owner of this stall?" "No." "Then you had no authorization to touch the item." A whisper moved through the crowd. "He fixes clocks by the entrance. Probably thought he found something expensive. People see a rich woman and start performing." Noah heard it. Dan could tell by the way his son's fingers tightened around the toolbox handle. Dan reached down and gently loosened Noah's grip before the old leather strap cut into his palm. "You didn't do anything wrong," Noah whispered. "I know," Dan said. "That doesn't mean we make this harder for Lily." Curtis lifted the clipboard. "Market policy is clear. Until ownership is established, a consigned item remains under the control of the stallholder." "There's no signed consignment form," Dan said. Graham's eyes flicked toward him. Curtis frowned and checked the paperwork clipped beneath the inventory sheet. The top form listed the music box as Lot 418, but the line-marked consignor signature was blank. The lot number had been written once in black ink, then partially overwritten in blue. Curtis covered the page with his hand. "Administrative errors happen." "Then photograph the error," Dan said. Curtis looked irritated. "Excuse me?" "Photograph the box. All 6 sides. Photograph the form. Timestamp both before anyone moves anything." Graham's tone stayed warm. "That seems unnecessarily dramatic. It protects you too." "From what?" "From anyone saying the box changed after this moment." The smell of kettle corn drifted through the aisle, sweet and strangely out of place. Evelyn watched Dan take one step back from the counter, surrendering physical control of the object he had just protected. He did not demand the box. He did not demand to be trusted. He asked for a record. That more than the melody made her pause. Curtis pulled out his phone and began taking photographs with visible reluctance. Top, bottom, left side, right side, front, back. When he turned the box over, A half-peeled circular label appeared beneath the walnut base. Graham's hand moved at once, 2 fingers settling over the lower edge. "Just an old dealer's sticker," he said. Lily leaned forward. Around her wrist, the blue ribbon shifted into the light, revealing a small white emblem woven into the fabric. Noah stared at it, then at the portion of the circular label not covered by Graham's thumb. "Dad," he said quietly, "those marks are the same." Everyone looked down. Graham removed his hand too late. The exposed part of the label showed the same curved symbol stitched into Lily's ribbon. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, not with belief, but with the first crack in disbelief. Curtis cleared his throat and turned the box upright. "We'll secure it in the office for 30 minutes while I locate the intake ledger. If ownership cannot be verified, Mr. Pike may submit it for formal appraisal." "By his own company?" Dan asked. Curtis's mouth hardened. "You are done handling this matter. Return to your table, or I will suspend your vendor space." The threat was quiet. That made it worse. Dan looked toward the west aisle, where his half-repaired clocks sat unattended beneath a sign he had painted himself. Missing even one Saturday could mean falling short on rent. He closed his father's toolbox and handed it to Noah. Then he picked up the blue ribbon where it had slipped loose from Lily's wrist, brushed a grain of dirt from its edge, and tied it carefully back in place. "People can question a story," he told her. "They do not get to take what matters before the questions are answered." Graham exhaled through his nose, still wearing the expression of a patient professional. For everyone's peace of mind, perhaps the girl should wait somewhere else. Evelyn finally spoke. No, the word was not loud, but it stopped Curtis from reaching for the box. She pointed to the incomplete intake form. "You will document who moves it, when it moves, and who has the key to the office." Graham nodded as though the instruction had been his idea. "Of course." Then, while Curtis sealed the box in a clear evidence bag, Graham said, "Be careful not to disturb the veil seal beneath the old pricing label." Silence returned in a different form. Curtis had never called it a seal. Dan had never called it veil. And the label was still covering half of whatever lay underneath. Dan heard it too. The veil seal. Graham's expression did not change, but his hand settled flat against the counter as Curtis carried the sealed music box toward the market office. For a man who claimed the label meant nothing, he had named what lay beneath it with remarkable confidence. "Old trade terminology," Graham said smoothly. "Collectors use it loosely." Evelyn studied him for half a second, then followed Curtis without answering. The crowd began to dissolve, disappointed that no one had shouted, confessed, or been dragged away. Within moments, the aisle filled again with the scrape of folding chairs, the clink of glassware, and the ordinary Saturday music of people bargaining over things other families had once loved. Lily remained beside the empty space on Graham's counter. Her hands were curled against her coat, one thumb rubbing the blue ribbon Dan had tied back around her wrist. "They're going to open it," she said. "Not without a record," Dan replied. "But they're going to take it away. For 30 minutes. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want kids to ask more questions." Her voice never rose. That made the fear inside it easier to hear. Dan glanced toward the west aisle. From where he stood, he could see his repair table beneath the painted sign, 3 clocks waiting in a neat row, and an empty chair where his next customer had been told to return at noon. Saturdays paid for groceries. A good Saturday paid part of the rent. A lost one became a conversation with the landlord that Dan had already postponed twice. Curtis was halfway to the office, carrying the clear evidence bag under one arm. Dan could still catch him, examine the ledger, and make sure Graham did not shape the next version of events before anyone else arrived. Then Lily's breathing changed. It became quick and shallow, almost hidden beneath the market noise. She stared at the bag as if the music box were being taken somewhere much farther than a room 20 yards away. Dan stopped watching Curtis. "Noah," he said, "bring the toolbox to our table and lock it." Noah looked from his father to the office door. "Aren't we going after them?" "Not yet. But they might find the book first." "Maybe."
Dan cerocet beside Lily.
Are you here with someone? My aunt is selling clothes in Building C. Does she know you came over here? Lily shook her head. Her lower lip tightened, embarrassed now, as if fear were another thing she might be blamed for. Dan did not ask why her aunt had left her alone. He did not make Lily defend another adult. He simply pointed toward a nearby food cart. Hot chocolate or apple cider? She blinked. What? You look cold. I'm not. Her fingers trembled around the ribbon. Dan waited. Hot chocolate, she admitted. He bought 1 cup for Lily and 1 for Noah, then counted the remaining bills in his wallet before folding it closed. There was not enough left for lunch. Noah noticed. He always noticed money when Dan tried to make it invisible. We can share mine, Noah said. We'll eat at home. The peanut butter's almost gone. Then we'll make eggs. Noah accepted that with the solemn nod of a child who had learned which questions helped and which ones only added weight. He carried the drinks to a bench beneath a faded county fair poster. Lily sat at the far end, both hands around the paper cup, letting the heat warm her fingers. Dan stayed standing until she looked at him. Can I ask you 3 things? He said. You can say no. She nodded. Who gave you the music box? My mom. When did you last hear it play all the way through? Lily stared into the swirl of chocolate foam. Before she got sick. Dan's face remained still, but something in his chest tightened. His wife had owned a small brass alarm clock that stopped 3 weeks after the funeral. He had repaired watches for strangers the next morning and left hers untouched in a kitchen drawer for nearly a year. Some objects did not break at the moment they stopped working. They broke when the person who understood their sound was no longer there to explain it. What did your mother tell you about the box? He asked. Lily pressed the cup to her lower lip without drinking. She said not to force it open. She said if I ever got scared, I should let it sing all the way through. Noah sat beside her, his sneakers barely touching the concrete floor. Maybe the last notes do something, he said. Like in a puzzle. Dan looked at him. Maybe, but we don't guess with someone else's property. Noah nodded and pulled a small spiral notebook from the side pocket of the toolbox. Can I draw the mark from her ribbon? He asked Lily, not Dan. Lily held out her wrist. Noah copied the white curved emblem in slow pencil lines, erasing twice when the shape came out uneven. It was not an investigation. It was a 10-year-old trying to keep one small detail from being forgotten. Dan picked up the folded photograph Curtis had returned before taking the box away. May I look? Lily hesitated, then placed it in his palm. The paper was soft at the creases and warmer than the air from being held inside her coat. On the front, a younger woman stood beside a dark piano with one hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl. The music box appeared at the edge of the frame, its crescent crack already visible. Dan did not recognize the people. He did notice the photograph was thicker along the bottom than the top. A narrow ridge ran beneath the paper backing, too straight to be water damage. He turned it toward the light but did not peel it apart. There's something inside this photograph, he said. Lily drew the cup closer. My mom told me never to cut it. Then we won't. Across the aisle, Graham stood near the market office, pretending to study a silver tray while watching them in its reflection. Kindness is admirable, he called, his tone light enough for strangers to mistake it for praise. But indulging a frightened child can strengthen a false memory. Dan folded the photograph exactly along its old creases and handed it back to Lily. Then it's a good thing I'm not asking her to remember anything new. Graham's eyes dropped to the photograph. You should be careful with the reverse side, he said. Old mounting paper separates easily. The air seemed to narrow. Dan had never mentioned the reverse side. Lily had never opened the photograph. Even Evelyn, standing just inside the market office with Curtis, looked back at Graham. Dan said nothing. He only watched the appraiser realize, 1 second too late, that he had just shown them exactly where the next truth was hiding. Dan did not touch the photograph again. That restraint seemed to disappoint Graham more than an accusation would have. You are reading suspicion into ordinary conservation advice. the appraiser said, smoothing one cuff beneath the market's white fluorescent light. Old photographs delaminate. Anyone with experience would know that. Then you knew there was backing paper, Evelyn said. Her voice remained even. Graham turned toward her with a patient smile. I assumed there was. Most mounted photographs have it. You did not say most, Dan replied. You said the reverse side. Curtis Bell stepped out of the office before the exchange could harden. He held the clear evidence bag containing the music box in one hand and a ledger under the other arm. The walnut case caught the overhead light, revealing the crescent-shaped crack across its lid and the half-covered circular seal beneath the base. We found the intake entry, Curtis said. Lot 418. Delivered Thursday afternoon with a box of estate items. Lily rose from the bench so quickly that hot chocolate rippled over the rim of her cup. By who? Curtis looked down at the ledger. The name is difficult to read. Let me see, Dan said. Curtis hesitated. The hesitation was small, but everyone felt it. Dan was still the repairman who had been threatened with losing his stall. Graham was still the appraiser whose television logo appeared on his business card. Evelyn was still a stranger to Lily, even if the market had begun whispering her name. You are not part of the intake review, Curtis said. He does not need to be, Evelyn answered. Read it aloud. Curtis angled the ledger beneath the desk lamp inside the office. The page smelled of dust, ballpoint ink, and the faint mildew of paper stored too close to a concrete wall. Consignor name appears to be A. Roland. Lily shook her head. My mom's name was Anna Rowan. Graham folded his hands. Roland and Rowan are easily confused in old handwriting. This was written 2 days ago, Dan said. Curtis's eyes lifted. Dan did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired, which made the question heavier. What time was the item received? Curtis checked the narrow column at the right edge. 4:15. Thursday. Yes. Lily stared at the ledger. That can't be right. Graham gave her a sympathetic look. Why not, sweetheart? Lily's shoulders drew tight at the word. My aunt didn't bring the box here until this morning. Curtis frowned. Your aunt brought it? She brought a bag of my mom's things to sell. I saw the box inside when we got here. Graham's expression barely shifted, but his right hand slid toward the ledger. Children are not reliable with dates during stressful events. Dan stepped half a pace closer, not blocking him, only making the movement visible. Lily, he said. What makes you sure it was this morning? She looked toward Building C through the open office door. Because Aunt Denise tied the blue price tags on the bags in the parking lot. She let me hold the marker. It leaked on my thumb. She showed them a faint blue stain near her nail. It was the kind of detail a child remembered because it had happened to her body, not because anyone had taught her to construct an alibi. Curtis looked again at the ledger. The entry for Lot 418 had been written in black ink. The number 418 appeared over another number in blue. That was already written over, Noah said quietly from beside the bench. He pointed without approaching the desk. I saw it when Mr. Curtis showed Dad the paper before. Curtis glanced at him. Noah lowered his hand at once and gripped the strap of the leather toolbox. He's right, Dan said. The lot number was overwritten before the box went to the office. Evelyn moved no closer, but her attention settled fully on the page. Is the Thursday entry in the same ink as the original lot number? Curtis held the ledger nearer the lamp. The black entry looked dry and slightly faded. The blue correction was brighter, with a tiny bead of ink pooled at the end of the final digit. Different pens, he admitted. Graham exhaled softly. Markets correct inventory numbers all the time. A mislabeled estate lot is hardly evidence of misconduct. It was a reasonable answer. Curtis seemed relieved to hear it. Even Evelyn did not challenge him. An overwritten number could be carelessness. A blurred surname could be poor handwriting. A child could misunderstand when an item entered a sales system. Dan knew suspicion became dangerous when people wanted it to become certainty too soon. He looked at the music box instead. Inside the clear bag, the brass key rested against the wood. A thin line of blue-green oil marked one side of its shaft. He had noticed it earlier, but only now did the color look familiar beneath the office lamp. Restoration lubricant, not household oil, applied in a narrow stroke by someone using a precision applicator. "May I ask one simple question?" Dan said. Curtis sighed. "One." Dan nodded toward the bag. "If the box arrived sealed in an estate lot Thursday, who turned the key before Lily touched it this morning?" No one answered. The old air conditioner clicked on above the filing cabinet, pushing a draft across the ledger. One loose receipt fluttered against the desk. Graham recovered first. "The consignor may have tested it." "Eh? Roland?" Dan asked. "Whoever delivered it. The person with no signature?" Graham's smile thinned. "Again, administrative errors do not become crimes because you dislike them." "I don't dislike the error." Dan kept his gaze on the key. "I'm asking who handled the mechanism." Curtis lifted the evidence bag. "There's no way to tell from that." "Maybe not yet." Dan pointed to the blue-green mark. "But that is not dust. It's oil." Graham answered too quickly. "Marlowe blue. Common in music box restoration." Evelyn's eyes shifted to him. Curtis looked from Graham to the bag. Dan remained still. He had not named the product. He had only called it oil. Graham seemed to understand the mistake the moment silence settled around him. "A generic name," he added. "Collectors use it broadly." "Do they?" Evelyn asked. Graham straightened his cuff. "Of course." Dan did not press. He knew a weak clue could collapse if forced to carry too much. Instead, he asked Curtis to photograph the oil under the same lamp and include the time in the frame. Curtis complied more carefully now. The phone camera clicked. Then Evelyn requested that the music box be moved into the glass front cabinet beneath the office security camera, with the bag seal visible at all times. "That protects everyone," she said, repeating Dan's earlier words. Graham gave a gracious nod, but his eyes followed the box as Curtis placed it behind the glass. Lily stood beside Dan, no longer clutching the hot chocolate. "Was he right?" she whispered. "Is that oil common?" Dan watched Graham step into the hallway and make a call with his back to them. "Some things are common," he said. "Knowing exactly which one they are before anyone names them is not." Through the office window, Graham lowered his voice. The market noise swallowed most of the sentence, but not the last 4 words. "Check the Marlowe account list." Evelyn heard them too. She did not confront him. She only turned toward the sealed box, then toward the half-hidden circular label beneath it, as if 2 separate clues had just begun pointing in the same direction. "Check the Marlowe account list." The words reached the office through the thin glass just before Graham Pike turned farther into the aisle and lowered his voice. Evelyn Vale did not follow him. She took out her phone, typed a brief message to someone named Rebecca, then placed it face down beside Curtis Bell's ledger. "Do not delete any market footage from this morning," she said. Curtis straightened. "We do not routinely. Preserve it anyway." Her tone was calm, not commanding, but the request changed the room. The old air conditioner rattled above them. Somewhere outside, a metal folding chair scraped across concrete and then stopped. Dan watched Graham return with the same professional smile, his hands empty, his posture composed. "I have contacted a restoration specialist," Graham announced. "Someone qualified to remove the uncertainty without turning this into a spectacle." "Someone from Marlowe?" Dan asked. Graham's eyes settled on him. "Someone accredited. By your company?" "Mr. Mercer," Curtis cut in. "You have made your point." Dan nodded once. He did not argue. The blue-green oil was only a clue, and he knew the danger of making a small truth carry more weight than it could hold. "Then use someone independent," he said. Evelyn picked up her phone again. "Already done." 40 minutes later, Dr. Helen Cho arrived carrying a narrow aluminum case and wearing a charcoal raincoat beaded with mist from the parking lot. She was in her late 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and the direct, unsentimental manner of someone who spent more time listening to mechanisms than to people. She showed Curtis her identification, photographed the evidence bag seal, and asked everyone except Lily and the recorded witnesses to stand behind a strip of yellow tape. "I will not determine ownership," Helen said. "I will only examine function, visible interference, and whether the current damage is consistent with an accidental fall." Graham inclined his head as if he had requested those exact limits. "That is all anyone should want." Dan remained beside Noah near the office wall. Lily sat on a metal chair with the photograph folded inside her coat and both hands around a fresh cup of water. Evelyn stood several feet away, close enough to watch but not close enough to influence the test. Helen removed the music box from the clear bag with cotton-gloved hands and placed it on a gray examination mat beneath the desk lamp. The walnut case looked smaller there, stripped of the crowd and the arguments, but the crescent crack across the lid seemed darker. Helen photographed the brass key, the half-covered circular seal, the blue-green oil, and the minute damage around the winding shaft. "Mr. Mercer," she said without looking up, "you released tension earlier? One controlled turn. Did you lift the mechanism? No. Remove any screws? No. Touch the underside label? No." Graham gave a soft sigh. "We are relying on his own account." Helen looked at him for the first time. "We are relying on the sealed photographs taken immediately afterward, the witness statements, and the condition of the screw heads. His account is one piece." The sigh ended. Helen tried the brass key. It resisted at first, then moved with a dry click. 7 notes emerged, thin but recognizable, followed by silence. The last note trembled in the office like a glass tapped with a fingernail. Helen waited for the cylinder to stop. "The mechanism is not exhausted," she said. "There is stored tension remaining." "Meaning?" Curtis asked. "The tune should continue." Graham folded his arms. "Or the comb is incomplete. Common in damaged boxes." Helen leaned closer and listened again, turning the key only enough to repeat the sequence. 7 notes. A pause. A faint scrape. Dan's head tilted before he could stop himself. Helen noticed. "What did you hear?" "A tooth passing where a note should engage." Graham smiled. "That is speculation." Dan kept his eyes on the box. "Yes." The admission seemed to surprise him. "Then how would you test it?" Helen asked. Dan pointed without crossing the tape. "Do not remove the comb. Rotate the cylinder by hand until the pause. Watch the 4th guide tooth from the left." Helen adjusted a magnifying lamp over the mechanism. She moved the cylinder a fraction at a time. The office became so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent fixture sounded mechanical. 1 tooth passed cleanly. A second followed. The 3rd struck. The 4th slipped beneath the comb without lifting it. Helen stopped. "It is bent." Graham stepped forward half a pace. "Age does that." "Sometimes." Helen changed the angle of the light. 2 narrow parallel marks appeared near the base of the tooth. "Age does not usually leave tool impressions." Curtis's phone stopped halfway to his mouth. Someone outside whispered and was shushed. Evelyn's fingers slowly lowered from the edge of the desk. "Can a fall create those marks?" she asked. Helen examined the crescent crack, then the interior mounting points. "Not in this location. The case impact is on the opposite corner." The tooth was gripped and displaced. Lily's shoulders dropped slightly, as if a knot had loosened inside her. "So I didn't do that?" Helen turned toward her, careful not to smile in a way that might feel like pity. "The fall may have damaged the outside corner. It did not bend this tooth." Dan saw Lily breathe in fully for the first time since the music box had been sealed. He did not tell her they had one. They had not. He only moved Noah's toolbox aside so she had more room beside the chair. "One thing at a time," he said. Graham cleared his throat. "Then someone attempted a repair before the item reached this market. That supports my original concern that the box has an undocumented history." It was a strong answer because it was true enough to delay judgment. Helen nodded. "Possible. And given that possibility," Graham continued, "the responsible step is to move the examination to a private lab, away from crowds and amateur interference." "No," Evelyn said. Graham's face remained pleasant. "Ms. Vale." Surely you understand the value of controlled conditions. I understand chain of custody. She turned to Helen. Can the next test be done here? Helen looked at Dan. You believe the bent tooth interrupts 3 notes? I believe it interrupts more than one. I do not know how many. Good answer. She opened her aluminum case and selected a narrow non-magnetic probe. I can realign it temporarily without removing the comb, but I want a continuous recording from 3 angles. Curtis positioned 2 market phones and the office security camera. Evelyn instructed Rebecca by phone to record the screen remotely and preserve the original files. Graham offered his own device. Helen declined it. Independent equipment only. The smile stayed on his face, but his thumb rubbed once against the side of his index finger. Lily was taken to the neighboring vendor office with Noah and a market employee so she could not hear the test. Before she left, Dan crouched beside her. Dr. Cho may ask you to remember the tune later. Do not guess. If you do not know, say you do not know. What if I get it wrong? Then you get it wrong. The truth does not need you to perform. Lily nodded and followed Noah through the door. Helen began. The probe touched the bent tooth. A tiny metallic ping sounded, followed by the softest release of tension. She adjusted less than a millimeter, withdrew the probe, and turned the key. 7 familiar notes played. Then came a pause no longer empty. 1 new note rose. A second followed. A third rang softer than the others, like a voice heard through an old wall. Evelyn gripped the back of the chair. Graham's composure shifted, not much, but enough. His eyes moved toward the neighboring office before anyone called Lily back. That proves nothing, he said. The child may have heard those notes online. He reached into his coat and produced a printed screenshot from an old Vale Foundation video. The melody was used publicly at a charity event. Evelyn took the paper. The printout showed a video timeline, a date, and the music box in the background of a stage display. Graham had prepared it before Helen finished the test. Dan asked Curtis to play the archived clip on the office computer. The video filled the monitor with banquet lights and polished speeches. Beneath them, the music box played 7 notes and stopped. The clip contained no ending. When Lily returned, Helen asked her to stand near the closed office door, away from the box. Do you remember what came after the part we heard earlier? Lily shut her eyes. Her fingers found the blue ribbon around her wrist. Then she hummed 3 notes. They matched Helen's test exactly. The chair beneath Curtis creaked as he leaned forward. The market whispers disappeared. Even Graham did not speak for several seconds. Helen documented the result in careful language. The child knew a 3-note sequence absent from the available public recording, while the mechanism contained a deliberately displaced tooth that prevented those notes from playing. It did not prove ownership. It did not prove who damaged the box. But it proved Lily had not invented the missing music after arriving at the market. Dan asked Helen to include those limits in bold. Graham looked at him as if he had expected celebration and found caution more threatening. Evelyn sent another message to Rebecca. Obtain the original upload file, not the public copy, she said, and request the Marlowe customer records. Tied to this lubricant. Graham's phone lit on the counter before he could cover it. A message preview appeared beneath an unknown number. Original appraisal file located. Do you want it removed? Evelyn read it. So did Dan. Graham turned the phone face down, but the room had already changed. The test had opened more than the last 3 notes. It had opened the possibility that someone had been managing the history of the music box long before Lily ever carried it into Bellwether Flea Market. The message on Graham Pike's phone remained face down, but everyone in the market office had already read it. Original appraisal file located. Do you want it removed? The words changed the shape of the room. Curtis Bell stopped beside the ledger. Dr. Helen Cho lowered her probe onto the gray mat. Evelyn Vale looked at Graham without anger, which seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Who sent that? She asked. Graham slipped the phone into his coat. A junior employee using careless language. Then ask them to preserve the file. I will handle it. No, Dan said. His voice was low enough that Graham had to turn toward him. Dan stood beside Lily rather than near the desk. The girl's fingers were still wrapped around the blue ribbon on her wrist, and Noah held the old leather toolbox against his shins. "Do not handle it," Dan continued. "Not until someone outside your company makes a copy." Graham's expression cooled. "You repair clocks in a flea market, Mr. Mercer. You do not direct document preservation." "He is not directing it," Helen said. "He is stating the obvious." Evelyn picked up her phone and called Rebecca. She did not identify herself by title, but the person on the other end responded with immediate precision. "Contact the independent archive, the insurer, and outside counsel. Preserve the original appraisal file, access history, deletion logs, and every related image. No one from Pike Heritage is to touch the records." Curtis looked at her differently after that. So did the vendors gathered near the office door. Until then, Evelyn had been a wealthy stranger who recognized a melody. Now the reach of her instructions made her identity impossible to ignore. Graham drew a breath through his nose. "Ms. Vale, this can be resolved privately. There is no reason to frighten a child with corporate history she cannot understand." Lily's shoulders tightened. Dan noticed before anyone else did. "Then stop discussing her like she is not here," he said. Graham's mouth opened, but Dan was already turning to Lily. "You do not have to stay in this room." "Will they open the picture?" she asked. "Only if you agree." "Will they take the box away?" "Not without a record." She looked at Evelyn, then at Helen. "I want to stay until they know I did not lie." Evelyn lowered her gaze for a moment. "Not from pity, from recognition." "Then you stay," she said. "And no one speaks for you without asking." Rebecca's first call came 11 minutes later. The Independent Insurance Archive had located a scanned property schedule from 17 years earlier. The office printer began feeding out pages with a dry mechanical rhythm. One sheet, then another, then a third. When the last page emerged, the printer stopped, and the sudden silence seemed to press against the glass walls. Evelyn laid the pages on the desk beneath the lamp. The first showed an old inventory photograph of the walnut music box. The crescent-shaped crack was already present. The circular seal beneath the base was fully visible, not half-covered by a dealer label. The serial number matched the faint digits beneath the modern paint. The owner line read Clara Vale Rowan. Evelyn did not touch the paper at first. Her reflection hovered in the dark office window behind it. "Clara," she said. The name came out barely louder than the air conditioner. Lily looked up. "You knew her?" Evelyn's hand moved toward the page and stopped. "She was my younger sister." No one spoke. Outside, the market continued in fragments. The squeak of a cart wheel, a child asking for popcorn, rain beginning to tap against the metal roof. Inside, the truth widened beyond the music box. Graham recovered first. A historic insurance schedule does not prove current ownership. Families sell assets. Estates change hands. "That is correct," Evelyn said. Her agreement gave him a moment of relief. Then, Rebecca sent the access log. The original appraisal file had been opened 4 times in the past 6 months from an account tied to Pike Heritage Appraisals. 2 pages had been exported. One had been marked for deletion that morning at 9:14. Curtis checked the wall clock. That was after the market opened. Helen looked toward Graham. And after Lily approached the stall, Graham removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it once to his upper lip. "My company performs archival reviews. Access does not imply misconduct." Another reasonable answer. Another layer of distance between himself and the act. Dan watched him place the handkerchief back into the wrong pocket, then reach for it again without finding it. "What was the exported page?" Dan asked. Rebecca's answer came through Evelyn's speaker. "A repair receipt and a transfer schedule. The receipt bears Mr. Pike's signature." Lily turned toward Dan. "The paper in my picture." "Dan nodded. "Maybe." He did not say yes. He did not let hope become evidence. Helen asked for Lily's photograph. Dan looked at her first. "Your choice." Lily removed it from her coat and placed it on the gray mat herself. A paper conservator from a nearby frame shop was called over as an independent witness. Under continuous video, the conservator warmed the old adhesive with a low-temperature tool and separated the backing along the thin seam Dan had noticed. A narrow receipt slid free. The paper was brittle, yellowed at the edges, and folded twice. Curtis caught his breath. The serial number matched the insurance schedule. The customer name read Clara Vale Rowan. The service description listed a damaged Melody cylinder and a concealed secondary latch. At the bottom sat Graham Pike's signature, dated 17 years earlier. Graham leaned in. That signature could be copied. Helen nodded. It could. Evelyn did not look at him. Then we verify it. The receipt also included a blue service stamp from Marlowe Restoration, the same company whose lubricant marked the brass key. The same account list Graham had ordered someone to check. Dan could feel the room turning toward accusation. He also saw Lily watching every adult face, learning how quickly suspicion could become punishment. Do not decide more than the paper proves, he said. Curtis stared at him. After everything he has done to you, you are protecting him? I am protecting the case. Dan's eyes moved to Lily. And her. If we rush, the first mistake becomes the excuse to dismiss everything else. Evelyn looked at him then, not as a repairman and not as a poor father standing out of place among expensive records. She looked at him as the only person in the room more interested in making the truth durable than making Graham suffer. Rebecca called again. The insurer had found a second document, a transfer schedule listing Clara's daughter, Anna Rowan, but the scanned copy ended before the signature page. The original paper file had been removed years earlier during a corporate archive reorganization overseen by a Vale Family Advisory Committee. Graham had served as outside valuation consultant to that committee. Evelyn sat down slowly. I approved that reorganization, she said. Did you approve removing Clara's records? Dan asked. She looked at the insurance photograph. I approved clearing disputed assets from the active collection. I told myself the lawyers would handle the rest. Lily's voice was quiet. Did you know my mom? Evelyn's face changed, not dramatically, but enough that the room seemed colder. I knew Clara had a daughter. I did not know she had a granddaughter. Graham stepped closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice as if privacy still belonged to him. This is exactly why we should stop. You are emotionally involved. Let counsel review everything away from cameras and crowds. Evelyn turned toward him. Away from the child you called confused? I was trying to protect her. By erasing the file? No file was erased. Someone tried. Graham's composure thinned around the edges. You are allowing a repairman to turn routine archival errors into a public accusation. Dan saw Curtis's office security camera reflected in the glass cabinet. Graham saw it too. His eyes flicked upward and away. That small glance told Dan more than the words. We do not need an accusation yet, Dan said. We need a timeline. He placed the insurance schedule, the repair receipt, the intake ledger, and Curtis's photographs in a straight line across the desk. 17 years ago, Graham signed the repair receipt. 6 months ago, his company accessed the file. This morning, someone tried to remove a page. Before the market opened, the box entered a lot with no signed consignor. After Lily found it, Graham knew the family name, the seal, the lubricant, and where the missing notes would stop. Curtis stared at the row of paper. Each piece was limited. Together, they began to form a shape no explanation could easily dissolve. Rebecca sent one final image. It was the back of the old insurance photograph. Written in pencil beside the serial number were the words, Hold for Clara's daughter. Do not release to family collection. Beneath the note was a set of initials. Evie Evelyn's hand rose to her mouth. Those are mine. Graham moved first. Then this concerns privileged family records and must be removed from public view. He reached toward the papers. Dan placed one palm flat on the empty desk between Graham and the evidence. He did not touch Graham. He did not raise his voice. No more closed rooms. The rain struck harder against the market roof. Curtis looked at the unsigned intake form, then at the office camera, then at the growing crowd outside the glass. "We do this at the original stall," he said, "with witnesses, preserved footage, and law enforcement present." Graham's face remained composed, but the hand at his side had begun to tremble. The truth was no longer a private family embarrassment or a damaged object on a flea market table. It was a chain, and every link now led back to the place where Lily had first been called a liar. By noon, the antique aisle at Bellwether Flea Market no longer looked like a place for bargaining. Curtis Bell had cleared the tables around Graham Pike's stall and arranged folding chairs in 2 straight rows beneath the corrugated roof. A portable monitor stood beside the walnut counter where Lily had first been called confused. Dr. Helen Cho placed the sealed music box on a gray examination mat under a lamp. A county fraud investigator waited near the office door with a notepad closed against his chest. No one raised a voice. That made every footstep sound louder. Dan Mercer entered from the west aisle carrying his father's leather toolbox, though he did not open it. His faded denim jacket was damp at the shoulders from the rain, and fatigue showed in the way he rolled one wrist before taking his place beside Lily. Noah stood on her other side, holding the spiral notebook in which he had drawn the curved emblem from her blue ribbon. Evelyn Vale sat in the front row rather than behind the evidence table. She had enough authority to take control of the room, but she did not use it. She watched. Graham arrived last. He wore the same navy sweater, now covered by a dark overcoat, and carried a slim leather folder beneath one arm. Several vendors shifted when he passed. He still looked like the most polished man in the market. "Before this becomes theater," Graham said, facing the chairs, "I would like to remind everyone that an incomplete record is not a conspiracy." Curtis lifted one hand. "You will have time to respond after each item is presented." "Of course." Graham offered a restrained smile. "I only want fairness for all involved, especially the child." Lily's fingers tightened around the edge of Dan's sleeve. Dan looked down. "You can sit behind us," he whispered. "I want to see the box. Then stay where you feel safe." Curtis began with the music box itself. Helen removed it from the sealed bag, documented the intact evidence tape, and turned the walnut case so the crescent-shaped crack faced the audience. The brass key rested against the side. The half-covered circular seal remained beneath the base. "This is the item heard playing 7 notes earlier today," Curtis said. "It is also the item Ms. Rowan identified as belonging to her late mother." Graham folded his hands. "Identified emotionally, not legally." Helen played the Public Veil Foundation clip on the monitor. 7 notes sounded beneath banquet applause and stopped. Then she played the continuous recording from her controlled test. The same 7 notes sounded, followed by 3 more after the bent tooth had been temporarily realigned. Finally, Lily's separate recording played from the neighboring office. Her small voice hummed the same 3 notes before she had heard the repaired mechanism. The aisle went quiet enough for rainwater to be heard dripping from a gutter outside. "This proves only that she knew a variation of the melody," Graham said. "Families share songs. Videos circulate. Memory is suggestible. It was measured and plausible." Several people in the back exchanged uncertain looks. Graham opened his folder and held up a printed email. "In fact, Clara Rowan once authorized me to keep details of the mechanism confidential because the tune had been copied within the family. I was protecting that request." Evelyn's gaze hardened, but she did not interrupt. Graham passed the email to Curtis. It appeared to carry Clara's name, an old date, and a request that Graham retain any removed component until ownership could be settled. For a moment, the room tilted back toward him. "You see," Graham continued, "what looked suspicious was responsible preservation. I arrived early because I was told an estate lot might contain disputed Vale property. I inspected the box to prevent improper access. The child dropped it afterward. Mr. Mercer then interfered with a delicate mechanism in front of a crowd." Dan absorbed the accusation without moving. Graham turned toward him. "You may have meant well, but good intentions do not make an unlicensed repairman a forensic expert." A murmur moved through the chairs. Curtis looked at the investigator. The investigator looked at the email. Graham had not disproved every clue, but he had given the room a story simple enough to believe. Dan stepped toward the monitor only when Curtis nodded. He did not touch the email. "Can you enlarge the footer?" he asked. Graham's expression did not change. "The footer is irrelevant. Then enlarging it will not hurt." Curtis zoomed in. At the bottom of the printed page sat a small authentication block with a square verification code. Dan looked at Helen. "When did that format become standard?" Helen leaned closer. "Not in the year shown." Graham spoke quickly. "It may have been added during migration. Then the original should not contain it," Dan said. Curtis opened the archived metadata supplied by outside counsel. The verification tool named in the footer had been released more than 3 years after Clara's death. A chair stopped creaking. Someone near the kettle corn stand lowered a paper cup without drinking. Graham's voice remained composed, but the warmth had left it. "That means the email was exported later. It does not mean the message was fabricated." "Correct," Dan said. He turned back toward the evidence table. "So we check what existed before the export." Curtis presented the insurance schedule next. The monitor showed the old photograph of the music box, the crescent crack, the full serial number, and the ownership line naming Clara Vale Rowan. Beside it appeared the repair receipt recovered from inside Lily's photograph. The same serial number. The same owner.
Graham's signature.
The blue Marlowe restoration stamp. "A repair receipt establishes service," Graham said. "Not theft." "No one said theft yet," Dan replied. The simplicity of it made Graham pause. Curtis then displayed the parking lot footage. At 5:42 that morning, Graham's car entered Bellwether nearly 2 hours before opening. The access log showed the consignment warehouse opened using a code connected to his company. Graham nodded as though expecting this. "I told you. I was notified of disputed property." "By whom?" Curtis asked. "A confidential source. Name. Protected by professional privilege." The county investigator finally opened his notebook. Appraiser-client privilege does not generally cover unauthorized warehouse access. Graham glanced at him, then toward Evelyn. "This should be reviewed by counsel, not performed for an audience." Evelyn remained seated. The child was accused before an audience. Graham's jaw tightened. Curtis played the warehouse camera footage. The image was grainy but clear enough to show Graham entering alone, removing the walnut box from an estate container, lifting the red felt lining, and working beneath it with a narrow tool. He placed something inside his coat. Then he bent close to the mechanism. When footsteps sounded in the corridor, he returned the box to the container and left. 20 minutes later, Lily entered the aisle with her aunt's bags. "The footage does not show what I removed," Graham said immediately. "It was a corroded recording cartridge that posed a risk to the mechanism." Helen's eyes lifted. Curtis froze the image. The object in Graham's fingers was too blurred to identify. Graham had found the gap. "A cartridge?" Dan asked. "Yes. You can see that from this frame?" "I handled it." "So you admit removing it?" Graham realized the cost of the answer, but only after it was spoken. "For preservation." The investigator wrote something down. Evelyn's assistant stepped forward and handed Curtis a printed invoice recovered from Graham's company records. It showed a payment for a replacement warehouse key and temporary bellwether access issued under a consulting account Graham had claimed was inactive. The invoice date was 6 weeks earlier. "That was for a separate inventory review," Graham said. "Then why was it billed to the same internal account that accessed Clara's appraisal file?" Evelyn asked. His eyes moved toward her, and for the first time the mask of professional concern slipped into irritation. "You are allowing personal guilt to distort ordinary records." Evelyn did not answer. She let the silence hold him. Dan placed the intake form, repair receipt, access log, invoice, and insurance photograph in a straight line across the table. "This is not revenge," he said. "It is a timeline. If one link is wrong, show us which one." Graham looked at the row of paper. The box entered the market through an estate consignment. "With no consigner signature," Curtis said. The serial number was obscured, Helen added. Your company accessed the file this morning, said the investigator. And you prepared a defense for the missing 3 notes before the test was complete, Evelyn said. Graham opened his folder again and removed a signed transfer agreement. Then perhaps this will end the speculation. Clara agreed to sell selected family pieces. Her signature was witnessed. The document looked old. The paper had softened at the folds. Clara's signature appeared at the bottom. Evelyn stared at it. That is her handwriting. The room shifted again. Lily's face fell. Graham's confidence returned by a fraction. There was no theft. There was a difficult family transaction later misunderstood by people who were not present. Dan did not look at the signature first. He looked at the property codes printed beside each listed item. Curtis, can you bring up the Old Vale inventory guide Rebecca sent? The guide appeared on the monitor. Dan compared the codes without touching the contract. This classification system began 2 years after the date on that paper. Graham's face went still. Helen leaned toward the page. The folds are old. The printing may not be. A document examiner standing beside the investigator requested the original. Under angled light, the signature ink absorbed differently from the typed text. The signature may be genuine, she said, but transferred from another document. Retention broke across the crowd like a silent wave. Graham's hand went to his coat pocket, found nothing, then returned to his side. Curtis received a call from the market office. He listened for less than 10 seconds before looking toward the investigator. The search team found a storage case in Mr. Pike's locked cabinet. Same serial number as the music box. What was inside? Evelyn asked. Curtis swallowed. Not the recording cartridge. 2 officers entered the aisle carrying a sealed evidence pouch. Inside lay a second brass key, longer than the winding key and cut with 3 narrow teeth. Helen held it beside the box without inserting it. Beneath the music cylinder, almost invisible in the shadow of the frame, was a matching slot. Lily reached for Dan's hand. He let her hold it. No one moved toward the mechanism. No one spoke above a whisper. The last piece had not yet been opened, but everyone in Bellwether could see that Graham had known exactly where the truth was hidden, and had carried away the only key that could reach it. Dr. Helen Cho lifted the second brass key beneath the examination lamp, and the entire aisle seemed to lean toward it. 3 narrow teeth caught the white fluorescent light. Beneath the music cylinder, almost hidden by the wooden frame, the matching slot waited in shadow. Do not insert it yet, the county fraud investigator said. Helen nodded. She photographed the key, the slot, the serial number on the evidence pouch, and the intact seal around the music box. Then she looked toward Lily. This mechanism may respond to the complete melody. No one will proceed unless you agree. Lily held Dan Mercer's hand with both of hers. Her fingers were cold. My mom said to let it finish. Dan lowered himself until they were eye level. Around them, vendors, officers, customers, and market employees stood beneath the rattling roof where Lily had first been dismissed as a confused child. You do not have to prove anything for them, he said. The evidence is already here. Lily looked at the walnut box. The crescent-shaped crack ran across its lid like a pale scar. I want to hear it. Dan nodded once. He did not take the winding key. He opened his palm and let Helen place it there, then passed it directly to Lily. One turn, he said. Slowly. Lily's thumb rested against the worn brass. Noah stood close enough that their sleeves touched, but he did not guide her hand. He only held the old leather toolbox against his knees and whispered, I'm right here. Lily turned the key. The spring tightened with a soft metallic pull. 7 notes rose into the market, the same fragile melody that had made Evelyn Vale turn around hours earlier. The 8th note followed. Then the 9th. Then the 10th, trembling but complete. Lily closed her eyes and hummed the final 3-note phrase her mother had taught her. Beneath the cylinder, something clicked. It was a tiny sound, quieter than the rain tapping the gutter, but every person heard it. Helen inserted the 2nd key. This time it turned. A narrow panel released beneath the red felt lining and lifted no more than half an inch. The smell of old paper and machine oil escaped into the cold air. Helen used conservation tweezers to remove the contents one item at a time and place them on the gray mat. First came a folded transfer document bearing a notary seal. Then a faded hospital identification tag printed with the name Anna Rowan. Then a sealed envelope addressed to Evelyn Valli. Beneath those lay a microcassette wrapped in waxed paper and a handwritten payment ledger no larger than a checkbook. Graham Pike's leather folder slipped from beneath his arm and struck the concrete floor. The sound echoed. He did not bend to retrieve it. Helen read the serial number on the transfer document aloud. It matched the insurance schedule, the repair receipt, the photograph, and the number beneath the altered paint on the box. The document transferred ownership from Clara Vale Rowan to her daughter, Anna Rowan, and named Anna's lawful descendants as successors. An independent notary record, pulled up by outside counsel, confirmed the seal and date. Evelyn stood slowly. Her cream coat seemed suddenly too formal for the place. Anna was Clara's daughter, she said. Lily looked at the hospital tag. Anna was my mom. No one moved. The fraud investigator asked Helen to open the payment ledger. Each entry listed a date, an amount, and a purpose written in careful block letters. Archive review. Asset dispute. Removal of contested materials. Reputation protection. Several payments traced to the same Pike Heritage account that had funded the warehouse key, accessed Clara's appraisal file, and produced the false transfer agreement. Graham swallowed. His mouth had gone dry. Those descriptions are not mine, he said. Anyone could write them. The investigator did not argue. He asked for the microcassette to be examined. Helen placed it in a portable archival player supplied by Rebecca. The machine clicked, spun, and released a low ribbon of static. Then a woman's voice entered the aisle. It was weak with age or illness, but steady. My name is Clara Vale Rowan. If this recording is being heard, then someone finally allowed the music to finish. Evelyn's hand tightened against the back of a folding chair. The tape continued. Clara described the music box, its serial number, the 10-note release mechanism, and the second key she had entrusted to a valuation consultant during a repair. She named Graham Pike. She said he had pressured her to surrender the box after the Vale Advisory Committee removed her branch of the family from the active collection. She described false appraisals, altered inventories, and documents presented as routine estate administration. Graham shook his head. She was ill. She misunderstood standard procedure. The cassette hissed. Clara's voice returned. Mr. Pike will say I was confused. He has used that word before. He used it when I asked for my daughter's name to remain in the record. Graham stopped speaking. A pen slipped from Curtis Bell's clipboard and rolled beneath the evidence table. No one reached for it. Clara did not accuse Evelyn of ordering the fraud. Her words were quieter than that, and more difficult to escape. My sister Evelyn knew I was being pushed out. She did not create the papers. She did not take the key. But she chose the company's silence over my voice. Silence can protect a business. It can also help a lie live longer than the people it harms. The tape clicked off. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rain ticked against the metal roof. Somewhere near the market entrance, a cash register drawer opened and closed, absurdly ordinary in the stillness. Every face turned toward Evelyn. She could have blamed the advisory committee. She could have called her attorneys. She could have said she had not known the details. Instead, she stepped away from the front row and approached Lily slowly, stopping several feet from her. Then she lowered herself so she was not standing above the child. Your grandmother was my sister, Evelyn said. Your mother was my niece. I let other people call their removal a business matter because that was easier than asking what it was doing to them. Her voice shook once, then steadied. You told the truth before any of us were willing to hear it. I am sorry. Lily did not answer. She was not asked to forgive. She reached for the music box, and Helen allowed her to rest both hands on the closed lid while the evidence remained documented. The fraud investigator turned to Graham. Your appraisal license will be referred for immediate suspension pending investigation. You are prohibited from accessing the box, the archive, the Bellwether warehouse, or any related digital records. The financial ledger, altered agreement, access logs, and footage will be submitted to the county prosecutor. Graham looked toward Evelyn. You cannot allow this performance to destroy decades of professional work. Evelyn stood. The softness left her posture, not replaced by cruelty but by decision. The evidence did that. Not the child. Not Mr. Mercer. Curtis stepped before the gathered vendors and read from a handwritten statement. Bellwether Flea Market formally acknowledged that Lily had not caused the internal damage to the music box. The unsigned consignment would be invalidated. Dan's vendor suspension threat would be withdrawn. New intake rules would begin immediately. Photographed serial numbers, signed consignor identification, dual key access, and automatic preservation of camera footage in disputed property cases. Then Curtis turned toward Lily. We should have listened before deciding which adult looked more credible. Lily breathed out. The sound was small, but Dan felt her grip loosen around his fingers. Reporters near the aisle lifted phones and microphones. Dan stepped between them and Lily without touching anyone. No interviews, he said. One reporter called after him. Mr. Mercer, how does it feel to be proven right? Dan looked at the evidence table, then at his son, then at the girl holding a box everyone had tried to define for her. This was never about proving me right. He lifted the music box only after Helen documented its release and placed it carefully into Lily's arms. It was about making sure she was not buried under someone else's version of the truth. Lily pressed the cracked walnut lid against her coat. Graham stood beneath the market lights with his hands empty, his reputation no longer able to answer for the documents laid before him. No one mocked Dan's jacket now. No one called Lily confused. The melody played once more, 10 notes moving through the same aisle where 7 notes had first made Evelyn turn around. This time, when the final note faded, the entire market remained silent. Then Evelyn approached Dan with a sealed proposal from the Vale Preservation Center and a promise that it would be written on Lily's terms, not the company's. Dan did not open. He looked first at Lily, then at Noah, and understood that the next decision would reveal whether this miracle respected their dignity, or merely found a more beautiful way to purchase it.